The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Psalms 19:1.
Idea of heaven. Well, a little boy from Nebraska thinks he has a pretty good idea because he says he's been there. We'll talk to him in a moment, but first, his story. Some people have called this God's country, with crimson sunrises and rolling farmlands. Imperial Nebraska, population 1,982, is the heartland. It's also where the Burpos, Todd, the local pastor, his wife Sonia, and their 3 kids live. Normal in all respects, except one.
A few angels, they came, picked me up, and I was looking right at Jesus.
That's right, Colton, their 11-year-old, has been to heaven.
Then he says the thing that gets our attentions, but that's where the angels sang to me, Mommy. And it's like, wow, angel, wow.
It all started when Colton was 4, with a near tragedy.
We'd really hit a real low because we looked at each other and knew we'd really blown it.
What they thought was the flu turned out to be a burst appendix.
We think it had burst for 5 days, so for a little kid to have all that poison in him for that long, yeah.
At the hospital, they were given little hope.
I remember the doctor just not saying anything. You know, that was a nightmare.
After 17 days in the hospital, Colton emerged, but he was different. He began speaking about things he couldn't possibly know about. His mother's miscarriage, his father's prayers, and a visit with his great-grandfather, Pop.
I was just sitting by the Holy Spirit, and then this guy comes up to me and says, "Are you Todd's son?" I say, "Yes." I got to see Jesus and 2 of the apostles, Peter and John.
Todd, Sonia, and Colton Burpo are with us now. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. Colton, I want to talk to you in a second, but let me talk to you first, Todd, and get this right out of the way. People are going to say, this is a pastor.
Yes.
This is a believer. This is a man of the cloth. He wants desperately to believe this, and he wants others to believe it, and that's why this story is out there. How do you respond to people like that?
Well, at first, we were surprised. We doubted ourselves. We never anticipated to talk to our son about these things. And what caught my attention, or what grabbed mine, is when he could tell me where I was while he was in surgery. The surgeon couldn't tell me that. The nurses in there couldn't. My wife couldn't tell me where I was praying, but he could tell me.
And you asked him how he knew that, and he said, because I could see you. I was sitting, I think he even said, I was sitting in Jesus' lap as you were doing all these things. So you were cynical, both of you, a little bit at first, until you started to hear these things.
Exactly.
I guess the simple explanation is there are a lot of people out there who want to believe, or at least want to question.
Yeah.
Is that the way you look at it?
Well, I think for us, like when he told us about his sister in heaven, that we hadn't told him about, another one of those holy cow moments, okay, that, okay, he can't make this up, he can't invent this, no memory was planted. But the peace that came over us and the healing, you know, just the wow, I have a daughter waiting for me. I think a lot of people need that type of hope and healing too. And I think that's what a lot of people are finding when they hear Colton's testimony.
So that's what you want people to take away from this, a sense of peace, perhaps?
Hope, healing. They know what they have to look forward to.
In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. John 14:2.
Eben Alexander almost died 4 years ago when an infection attacked his brain. Did you go to heaven?
Yes. 4 years ago, Alexander nearly died from a massive brain infection that plunged him into a coma and shut down nearly his entire mind. He was barely alive in this world, but he says he journeyed elsewhere.
I was rescued by this beautiful spinning white light that had a melody, indescribably beautiful melody, that opened up into a bright valley, very verdant valley, blossoming flowers.
And he says God was there as a vast presence of infinite love. He met a young woman, he says, his guide, as they soared on a butterfly wing, and she gave him a message from heaven.
You are loved, you are cherished, there's nothing you have to fear, there's nothing you can do wrong.
A lot of people are going to say, Doctor, it was a hallucination.
I know this was not a hallucination, not a dream, not what we call a confabulation. I know that it really occurred, and I know it occurred outside of my brain.
As a neurosurgeon and a skeptic about God before his coma, Alexander says there is no scientific explanation for what he experienced, given how sick his brain was, how near death. Other scientists dismiss his claims, but there's this. After he recovered, he was sent a picture of a long-dead sister he had never met or seen. It was her, the girl he believes he saw on the butterfly wing in heaven.
It was the most profound experience I've ever had in this life.
People have had a near-death experience, according to the research from our next guest. So when someone escapes death and tells their story, they may hold remarkable clues that can possibly teach us about a life to come. John, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So near-death experiences, you believe in them now. You've studied over 1,000 cases of them.
Yes.
You didn't used to be a religious man, but then became one. Explain that to us.
Well, when my dad was dying of cancer, someone gave him the first book on near-death experiences, Life After Life, and I picked it up one night and I read it cover to cover, and after reading it I thought, oh my gosh, like, if this is true, this is the most important thing I could possibly find out about.
What were the commonalities you heard in the stories?
Yeah, in Imagine Heaven I write about 12 commonalities, like we're ourselves. We have a body, but they talk about how we don't just have 5 senses. It's like we have 50 senses.
Do we look the way we looked when we died, or do we look the way we looked at our favorite age? How do we look?
Well, that's an interesting question, because people say a little bit different things, and I have my own theory I come up with in the book. But people basically say we're in our prime, and you recognize each other, and they see beauty, not unlike Earth, mountains and trees and, you know, gorgeous flowers, but they experience it in other dimensions of time and space.
Is there a peace?
Oh, it's unbelievable. People talk about, well, many people talk about being in the presence of this man of light that they know to be God, and in his presence they never want to leave. What people always say is, I felt like I was home. I felt like that's where I belong.
But you know the skeptics say, this is all BS.
Oh, absolutely.
And this is people who are having maybe pre-death experiences, and they're connoting something that they've heard on television or read in a book.
Well, and I was an engineer before a pastor, so I have a very analytical mind, and I ask a lot of the same questions. And I've interviewed doctors who have had these experiences. For instance, there was an article written in The Lancet, a prestigious medical journal, about a man who came in cardiac arrest in the hospital. His dentures were taken out. He was unconscious. They did CPR. He was unconscious for a whole week, moved to another room. When he comes to, he tells them where his dentures were, that they were put in this crash cart in this other room. He couldn't have possibly seen that, except he said he left his body. He witnessed what had happened.